First things first, I would like to extend a big thank you to Marie-Laure and Gauthier, our lovely co-chair of the Private Debt Committee. This is the reason you're here tonight is due to their constant proactivity and the brainstorms they're constantly having and putting ideas into action. So as mentioned, this is kind of their brainchild, this event, and it's the third event of a series focusing on debt, on private debt and ESG. So the idea today is actually to showcase the interconnection between ESG and private debt through the eyes of market operators. So this brings me also a way to thank our panelists, the market players. So we have Priscilla from EIF, Viliana from MV Credits, and Vincent from Ticker How Capital. Thank you very much for coming and for sharing your insights. Last but not least, I would like to thank Deloitte for hosting us in those beautiful walls, and also Deloitte staff. So thank you to Philippe Lenges, to Vivienne, and to Aurora for helping us putting this together. So enough of me, and I basically would like you to welcome Priscilla, who will kickstart the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johan. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. And I will start off with a short presentation of what EIF does. Well, first in general, and then mainly with a focus on ESG and sustainability. And let's kickstart with a short introduction on what the EIF does. I don't know, most of you will probably be familiar, so I'll keep it short. The idea is for EIF to support EU SMEs and small mid-caps access to finance. So that is kind of the idea behind, and then there are different ways to do it. And one of them is to invest as an LP into funds. And on the debt fund side, we can do that under several objectives, let's say to be a market developer, to be a market catalyst, and then to a lesser extent, market access, because private debt remains a relatively new asset class. So the main focus now, and especially under the mandate under which we're currently investing, the InvestEU mandate, I don't know if you heard of it, is to go into more untapped markets to promote new thematics, like, for example, especially in the context of climate, also social, and for example, on the equality, etc. Then to move into new strategies and also managers that maybe for the first time are setting up a fund. So basically to be there to support the ecosystem. And in this context, maybe to give a quick overview over where we stand in terms of ESG. So EIF is part of the EIB, and as EIB group, we are signatories of a number of relevant agreements, meaning the UNPRI, the GRE, the TCFD, pardon. And then we produce the relevant sustainable reportings. And as an important point, the EIB climate roadmap, which is the idea to move Europe towards a green continent. So basically increasing inter alia investments into the green space. By 2030, there shall be 1 trillion euros be deployed. What does EIF do? Let's say on the left-hand side, we can see, first of all, we integrate ESG as a critical part of the analysis. Then we're active in designing the relevant financial products. And an interesting part may be to look at investments that can be considered as sustainable. And the EU has promoted the EU taxonomy. What has been done on EIF side is to adapt it to some certain degree to the lower end of the market and look more at the technical screening criteria and less at the do no significant harm, and thus make it slightly more easier for small companies to achieve them. And in the same way to cover the 6 pillars, while the EU taxonomy for now only covers the first 2 pillars. Okay, now let's move to EIF in senior private credit. We're an LP with a clear focus on sustainability, amongst other criteria, obviously, but as the topic here is now ESG, we will focus on this one. This slide gives you a brief overview of what we have done in the private debt space in the last years. So basically 2.8 billion invested into more than 60 funds, benefiting more than 3,000 companies. These companies can be, or the fund managers can be established, emerging, or first time. And we can say that currently there's a larger focus on first-time managers. In terms of investment strategy, we go for senior, unitranche, and asset-based. These are the main investment strategies. Now, what do we see right now with respect to private debt and impact? We see a clear move, especially in the last 12 to 18 months, towards an increasing awareness of sustainability. And that materializes in two ways. Let's say we have on one hand generalist funds that start incorporating ESG criteria into their investment analysis, for example, like looking at physical risk, looking at transition risk, looking at social aspects, etc. So, for example, having an ESG score, while at the same time, doing generalist investments. And then we have an even more increasing part, which was almost zero a few years ago, of thematic funds. And they can either have, let's say, a thematic investment theme by the underlying loans or by the way they attribute KPIs towards each company. I will provide more information on this later. I think the important point is really to see that all over Europe, there is a move towards thematics with, of course, in the lead, let's say, the more private debt developed countries. So what do we see in terms of, let's say, more technical factors? In terms of SFDR, the objective of the SFDR as such was to harmonize disclosure requirements, even though it has become some sort of a label. Let's say on the Article 6, in any case, you still have to do some minimum disclosure requirements. Then in the Article 8, you're supposed to promote environmental and social characteristics. And the Article 9 is supposed to have a sustainable investment target, which can be environmental or social. And here, for example, from EIF side, we look at this to be 100% sustainable investments, and which also is now the guidance from the European Commission. In EIF's pipeline, we can see that we mainly focus on Article 8 and 9, with a few, let's say 6, but mostly in, let's say, countries where private debt is not, or is maybe less developed. Then another point is a question of impact funds, which we see as well, which often is linked towards the SFDR. So let's say an Article 9 SFDR fund would often also be an impact fund, because they would have a sustainable objective, which can then also be an impact theme. But let's say to be an impact fund, we need to add the additional impact objective on top, which needs to materialize in a clear intentionality, additionality, and the possibility then to also measure this. On the right hand, a quick reference to these climate action environmental sustainability criteria. So basically, when do you invest in green loans, which is mainly in the Article 9 and in the impact funds when it has an environmental focus. And here comes, I hope it's not getting too technical. We can also have questions afterwards. So mainly on the debt side, we see two principal strategies to carry this out. So one is to have a generalist company that then wants to improve their ESG sustainability performance. And this is generally done by having a specific impact roadmap attached to the financing, which is then linked to a margin up, downgrade, or to a penalty payment. So there are different ways of implementing this in practice. And let's say when we move towards an Article 9 fund or impact fund, then this should by all means be combined at a fund level of objective, which is then linked to part of the performance fee. And the other possibility is sustainable loans, which clearly have a green, well, it could also be a social purpose, but let's focus on the green now, green purpose, which can be through the activity of the company. Let's say they're active in a so-called green sector, developing digital solutions for transport, or technical, let's say, new technical developments that will allow companies to reduce their carbon emissions. There are different possibilities. Or other possibility would be for a company that is active in a non-green sector, but that carries out investments that are green, like the typical example, installing solar panels on their roofs. Just checking the time. Okay. Then what do we usually do? Let's say when EIF looks at a fund, I mean, there's a number of criteria we would look at. So we're really just focusing on the ESG part. We want to understand if there is a, let's say, general financial strategy that is extra financial strategy that is followed, how and if ESG is integrated into the fund's investment analysis and in the decision-making process. Then if there are any exclusions for the fund eligibility, any ESG scoring methodology, what would be excluded? Are there any risks to, for example, when it's in Article 9, to be sure that there is no significant harm, that the fund is able to implement the PAIs, etc. And on top for SFDR Article 9 funds and impact funds, to look at the investment objective, make sure that it is coherent and that the fund, it's actually able to implement what it has promised. We have, let's say, on the sustainability linked loans, we pay specific focus to the methodology that is applied and how it is reviewed, how is the alignment of interest achieved. And on the sustainability loans part as well, how can the fund invest in the green loans? How can it be measured? For example, when we talk about avoided emissions, it is a whole, well, it's a relatively new field. And the new calculation measures are also coming up, like, for example, reference to a reference scenario and understand what is actually avoided or reduced. And then for impact funds, we would look specifically at how this links at fund level to an overarching objective and how this is then linked to the carried interest or performance fee. And last but not least, there are some examples of what we see in the market. So on the left-hand side, you can see what I mentioned quickly beforehand. So it can depend on the fund's strategy and on the company's underlying investments. Like, for example, in the energy development sector, it can be climate tech, it can be some sort of energy savings, green mobility, or, for example, agriculture, to move towards sustainable agriculture practices, or, as mentioned before, to do an investment in the green sector. So, for example, we have one fund that aims at reducing energy efficiency or increasing energy efficiency and helps companies invest in measures that will allow them to reduce their carbon footprint. So there, it's also an impact fund and and an Article 9 fund. And the objective is to contribute to the reduction of CO2, and it is measured in tons of CO2 avoided. Then another fund which contributes to the financing, here we're actually in the area of sustainable loans, to the financing of companies that develop new solutions, which will then allow market players to reduce their carbon emissions. And here we talk about the concept of avoided emissions. Basically, the company itself during the production or during its development will actually increase its emissions, but by its solution, those that will use it will actually reduce their emissions. And then you need to calculate the differential between the two and make sure that the total emissions avoided is actually above zero. And the last one is we find it quite interesting as well, because it combines the two possibilities, meaning on one hand, sustainable loans linked to sustainability linked loans. So basically, sustainable loans that on top have KPIs that the borrowers need to adhere to. That, I think I don't know if the presentation will be saved afterwards, but also happy to provide further details later on at the ESG process at EIF if there is interest, and some further details on the CANDS, Climate Action Environmental Sustainability Criteria. I think I won't go into detail now and hand over to Marie-Laure.
Thank you. And thank you to have shared the view of the EIF. And we know how valuable it is because EIF is a big anchor investor in those in private debt, and really have nice guidance also on the website. So I don't know indeed if we will share your slide, maybe we can find a way, but even the website of EIF is full of very good materials, I must say. So after this very nice presentation from Priscilla, I think the audience will be happy to also have the view of the GP here on stage with me. To start the discussion, may I ask you a bit your view of the current market trend, and maybe also already your market outlook for ESG applied to private debt. Biljana, do you want to start?
Maybe, yes. Thank you, Marie-Laure. BMV Credit has been investing for more than 20 years in this asset class, and we believe that the private credit market today is a very, very interesting entry point for investors. It's a floating rate asset class, as so many of you will know. So for us, interest rate risk is not really a big topic. For us, the biggest risk is default risk. And of course, well, we all see that inflation and the threat of recession is threatening to raise the default rates, albeit from very low levels. And we admit, yes, default rates will go up. However, this has created opportunities, and the opportunities for us as a fundamental credit picker, we are fundamental investors, and we have proven capacity or ability to pick resilient companies, sustainable companies in sectors that are non-cyclical, companies that have pricing power and a better place to provide returns in this environment. In addition to that, as public finance has become more scarce and companies still seek capital, we see that the lending terms from lenders' point of view have improved. We see better loan pricing, we see stronger documentation, we see lower leverage in a lot of cases, and this will help the vintage maybe make the vintage a very good one for investors. Altogether, this makes for puts private credit providers or private lenders in a very good position. Not only an important stakeholder with the equity partners, but also with the companies, and puts us on the decision-making table, puts us on the table to make decisions, gives us access and influence on a lot of topics, but also on ESG and sustainability topics.
Thank you, Biljana. Indeed. And Vincent, I know for Tikehau, ESG is also among the top priorities. Do you want to share the view on this?
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'm going to share Tikehau's view and give you a bit of an overview of what's going on in the market, because I'm going to introduce myself, but I'm the head of ESG for private debt. So I only cover private debt at Tikehau, mainly in Europe. So I'm really involved into the fundraising stuff, but also really involved on the structuration of the new sustainability linked loan instruments. So I have a kind of flavor of what's going on and see what are the trend at the corporate level, but also at the financial market overall, because banks are also improving, not as quick as they should, but they are improving. So at Tikehau, obviously, private debt is the main asset class. So ESG has been integrating into this asset class for 2 years now. We structured our first ESG ratchets 2 years ago. So we are pretty at the forefront of that. We have improved so far. If you look at one of our main fund, which is a TDL5, so this is our flagship fund, we have 52 ESG ratchets out of, I guess, 80 or 85 companies. So it means that more of 50% of the AUM of this fund are covered under a sustainability strategy, which is a big improvement compared to what we did on the previous vintage TDL4, because basically it was 0. And also we launched 2 impact funds. So this is another level of strategies, but Priscilla already covered that pretty extensively. And so as of today, we have around 500 million AUM under this impact strategy. We just recently launched a thematic fund about decarbonization. So definitely at the center of our strategy, like most of our peers. What I can say quickly about the market is banks are trying to catch up overall in Europe. Today I was speaking to a Spanish bank about a deal. We wanted to be the ESG coordinator of the debt. They didn't want to leave us this role for the first time. Usually they were very happy that, you know, we take the role because they didn't have internally the expertise. Now they understood. I feel like more and more banks understood that this is a way to differentiate yourself and also create a relationship with your partners, I mean, your portfolio companies. So they are coming on this side. Usually I have to say before that, honestly, I have to say we were pretty alone. So it's good to have the keys of the house and do whatever you want with the CEO of the portfolio companies. That was a pretty comfortable position, but it's changing. At the PE level, because this is interesting and maybe we're going to touch base on that a little bit later, they are working on their sophistication on ESG. So even in France or the south of Europe, you see a lot of well-known PE companies. They don't have internally the expertise in ESG, and they are realizing slowly but surely that they are missing a lot of stuff because basically they give us also the keys of the house to the private debt lenders, which is always surprising to me. But since they don't have the expertise, they didn't have the choice. And you see that they are also trying to catch up. They hired a lot of people, senior people from different kind of background, to also put in place more and more often their sustainability strategy within their own portfolio companies to create value. So from my personal point of view is we are going toward the right direction. I don't think the pace is quick enough, honestly, but at least everyone realized that they need to enter into this market, otherwise they will be left out or left behind.
Thank you, Vincent, and it's a very good transition indeed to toward our first big topic, which is about lending activities and the impact of lenders on real economy. And so my first question for you will be, is it really the role of the lenders to act on ESG, or should this role be left to the private equity holder? So Priscilla, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. I mean, an interesting question. I think as you could see also a bit from the presentation, from an EIF perspective, we find it very important also for lenders to be involved. It's very interesting to see that this is also supported by players like Deloitte and MB Credit and other GPs that we see in the market that follow on this. I mean, there are challenges attached to it. Like, for example, obviously you don't sit at the table, you cannot influence that much at the decisions, but however, there are ways to make the market move into the right direction, mainly through, for example, these sustainability linked loans, where you link the financing to such a roadmap and then really go in detail, analyze the company, what improvement they could make. And for example, we also see funds that then have a CO2 reduction target at the level of the fund. So this can be achieved by lenders. And I think in addition, what is really important is that debt financing is also a needed alternative to equity financing. So for example, if we do not wish, or if borrowers do not wish to be diluted, they go for debt financing. And here there are many green companies, or also for green investments.
Indeed. Biliana, do you want to add something?
Yes, I agree. I think Vincent already started on the topic of influence of private lenders. And thank you, Priscilla. I totally agree that we more and more have a seat at the table. And at MB Credit, we've been, we see this from risk management point of view. We are the stewards of our investors' capital. and it's our fiduciary responsibility to manage risk. The biggest risk for us is downside risk as lenders. So already for 3 or 4 years, every single investment we make has gone through ESG due diligence. Whether the loan is going to have a ESG ratchet or not, all of our investments go through ESG due diligence at a very pre-investment level. And also, as everybody agrees, we are a significant source of capital for the companies. We have also very good access to the management team and to the sponsors. For the sponsor side, as lenders, we engage only with sponsors that share our common values, our principles and convictions. So we work only with sponsors that UNPRI or similar members that have made public commitments to following sustainability and responsible investment principles, which will ensure that throughout the life of investments, let's remember that these are investments that we hold for 5, 7, sometimes 10 years. Through the life of this asset, we're going to have a partner who shares our values and can work together with us to implement these values at company level. So working together with the sponsors is a very effective way to help and support the investee companies on their sustainability journey. And this synchronized approach usually works very well.
Thank you. I think the three of you already mentioned the term ESG ratchets, and that's very much something indeed which is very powerful, or maybe not, when applying it on a private debt. Vincent, do you want to maybe remind also the concept of ESG ratchet, maybe before answering my question, which is it really efficient to put in place an ESG ratchet based on your experience of the last 2 or 3 years at Tikeo?
Yeah, sure. So quickly, what is an ESG ratchet? Also called sustainability loan, and you have all the names. But it's structuration KPIs we're gonna put at a debt level. So we're gonna discuss the KPI with the portfolio company, the equity sponsor, when they have the expertise internally. And we're gonna set targets against these KPIs. We put this structurations of KPI and SPTs through, a loan, which is not, we can be a general purpose loan. So this is the strength of this product, is that you can put the structuration on almost any kind of loans. So it applies to a lot of different companies. It applies to a lot of different debt instruments, and it no matter what the sector you operate, as opposed to a green loan where the underlying asset has to be green. The main strength of this product is transition. So this is what you're gonna try to achieve through the KPIs and the objectives you're gonna set up. What is complicated to when you structure an ESG ratchet or sustainability linked loan is not to put KPI and objectives. Everyone can put KPIs and objectives on their legal doc. That's pretty easy. What is complicated is to find what are the core transitional points of each company you're gonna work on. Okay, and this is where the internal expertise of the person that's gonna structure the ESG ratchet is very important. And we saw a lot of different approaches over the last years that were not strong enough to be qualified as sustainability linked loan. They were literally, greenwashing at one point, either because the KPI were not relevant at all, based on, the ESG maturity of the company or the sector the company operates, or the objective setups against this KPI were too loose, not challenging enough. This is why it's very important that whenever, if some of you wants to structure that kind of things, the main thing is to make sure you have internally the expertise. And by the way, thanks for asking me, because we actually wrote a guide about best practice guide on sustainability linked loan with France Invest in France. And it has been translated in English. And the idea behind that is to harmonize the practices around this product. And I invite all of you to join the initiative, okay? Because everyone can join the initiative. And the idea behind joining the initiative is you're gonna promote the principle of this guide to make sure that, the growth of this product will be done under sound characteristics. Sorry, that was a longer answer for your first questions. On the second part, I'm going to try to be more quicker. Obviously, it's very efficient. If you do that properly, this is the best way as a lender to make sure that the company you're going to invest in will transition against strong KPIs and make sure that its financial profile going forward will improve. Okay, because at the end, we do that not because we are nice people and we want to adjust the margin. Oh, I forgot to mention that, but obviously there is a margin adjustment on the ESG ratchet up and down. If the company meets the KPI, it goes down, and the other way around if the company doesn't meet the KPI. So there is a margin adjustment involved into the transaction. And the idea behind that is not to finance, the capex of the company or to do, to look like nice guys. The idea is, as investors, our role is to take risk, and the ESG ratchet is a way to integrate within your margin the cost of your debt. I mean, the margin you're gonna implement to the company, the extra financial component. So it's a way to assess what is the extra financial risk of the company you're gonna invest in. Okay, and this is the only purpose of it. I know there was a lot of debate about what is the purpose and why we do that, and should we have a ratchet up also because we don't want to look like making money on the back of ESG. Now the idea is I assess my risk, I try to evaluate it, and I integrate that into my margin. If the company transition, its financial risk, its financial credit going forward will improve, so I'm okay to decrease my margin.
Thank you. And indeed, it's a very comprehensive mechanism with a strong link between this financial incentive and meeting the ESG KPI. And that's in that sense very powerful. And that's, I think, one of the biggest tools that the lender can have, especially when we talked before about private equity in the comparison with private equity. But I guess also when you're not able to, for some reason, to put in place this ESG ratchet, you may also have some alternative still as a lender to influence companies towards ESG criteria. Bibiana, do you think about any alternative to ESG ratchet?
Yes, I mean, we also have used the ratchet tool quite a lot, but it's not exclusively the only tool that we use. At MV Credit, as I said, we have a pre-investment questionnaire which identifies the risks that Vincent mentioned on financial risks. So that's not only environmental but also risk related to good governance. To social factor, for example, community or labor relations, which are more and more important these days. And these are all included in our pre-investment memorandum as both the risks and opportunities, of course, where we have the opportunity to improve things directly. For our assets, we continuously monitor on both the risks and opportunities as they develop. We engage with the companies, so that's part of our regular monthly or quarterly reporting. And then in a more structured format, we have annual report where we collect the data, compare it with the previous year or investment thesis, and we rank and rate our assets, and we include this in our annual report. The annual report we've been producing for a number of years now, and it's very important to notice that it includes both our commitment as an organization, but also a detailed report on our investee companies on their ESG performance, whether they have improved versus previous year on aggregate or not. And we also compare them to benchmark relative to their peer group, to their industry. And this is a way also to support our investors in their own reporting, in their own view of the exposures and their risks, but also work with the companies then to work with the laggards, for example, to get them up to industry standards, or companies where we see deterioration of performance, find the reason for that deterioration and work together with them to improve. Again, we're working very closely on this. We're not alone. We're working very close with the sponsors where there is a joint interest that sustainability is part of the overall performance of the company, and there is a joint interest to make improvements there. So on the ratchet side, yes, it has to be and any KPIs we put in place, they have to be measurable, they have to be concrete, relevant, and stretching enough to make a difference.
Indeed. Any comment from Priscilla or Vincent on
I can say a word on the engagement. Obviously, there is what you mentioned, and the ESG ratchet is the main tool we use, because this is, to me, the most powerful tool we have as of today as a debt provider. But we see more and more often new ways to engage with companies, even as debt provider. For example, now we sit to 2 or 3 sustainability board of some of the companies we invested in, which is pretty new, because we didn't have any seat before and on their conventional board. But now in sustainability, since they recognize our expertise, they invite us to their board. And it's a way for us to make sure that also, in addition to the ESG ratchet, when they're going to have to report on an annual basis on their KPIs and objective, it's a way to make sure that we will monitor and see what they are working on and help them also to improve. Because when you think about it, today we mainly invest on SMEs, okay, in Europe. And when you look at these people, I talk to a lot of CEOs, and most of them, they don't have an ESG team internally. So they don't have internally the expertise. And even themselves, they are lost. They don't know what they should do. They know that they have to act, because it's very important now to make sure that your company will transition. On most of the companies I work on, everyone understood, okay, at least this is a good step. Now they don't know how to deal with it. So they are very happy that you give them some expertise, okay, whenever you can talk to them and help them, to put them on the right track. So basically, in addition to have their cost of borrowing tied to their achievement of the KPIs on the ESG ratchets, you can also provide expertise to the CEOs of the portfolio companies, or even from time to time the sponsors. And this is something which is very, very valuable to them, because they are lost, and we can't blame them, because when you look at the regulation and all that things that are coming, they came and they are coming also. I can understand why they are lost.
Talking about regulation, I'm going now to my next topic about SFDR. So it's been also touched upon by Priscilla during the presentation. First question on SFDR. So as part of the Private Debt Technical Committee of the Luxembourg Association, we already did 2 webcasts, so we won't explain in details here the technicity of the SFDR, but I will go more directly to the question to the panelists. And Biliana, first question is for you. Is it a good directive?
Yes. I don't think there is a right and wrong answer. There is only one answer, and then the answer is yes. With all its imperfections, I think it's well needed to put some kind of level playing field. Let's remember, this is still only a labeling directive. So sorry, it's not labeling, but it is a disclosure directive. So putting a level playing field for disclosures, transparency, and by disclosing publicly and committing to certain standards, then companies also commit to ongoing reporting and delivering on the promises on what's on the label. So definitely a step in the right direction. As a first step, of course, baby step, but definitely a step in the right direction. Things are moving forward from this SFDR in itself. We see attempts from, for example, AMF in many other jurisdictions to add to it, to make sure that the perception that this is a label is met with a bit more structure, a bit more concrete commitments rather than only disclosures. But I think it's definitely a step in the right direction.
So indeed, as you said, it's supposed to be a transparency directive, but it's been used a bit as a purpose deviated a bit and toward classification of investment strategy. And I think, Priscilla, you mentioned in your presentation a lot about Article 6 a bit, but more about Article 8 and 9. And so can you comment a bit about the appetite from the investors towards those Article 8 and 9 classification?
Definitely. And maybe to just take a small step back, what does this class, or what does the SFDR actually reach? It means that investors and the community as such actually become aware of the, let's say, ESG topic, of the risk assessment, and then of the way to actually be able to make a change. I think we have different levels here that we can look at. And the SFDR, I think, is a good way to raise this awareness. Then the appetite, to come directly to your question, it depends what we see on the geography. And so we have some countries which are really on the forefront, where also investors have more and more pockets actually going towards sustainable investments, or at least that need to have a certain level of ESG integration into the process. For example, also investors that have a certain Paris alignment target and then actually need the underlying funds to also respect it. I mean, France is definitely at the forefront of this development. Then we see other countries where there's, let's say, appetite, and sometimes it's even already integrated into the investment approach, but maybe less formalized. So here, I think we move a bit more towards the Nordics, I would say. And also there's what we see is a bit more prudence, because we know it is still developing. There are new recommendations coming from the European Commission. Also, I mean, I don't know, every once in a while, a long document of questions and answers. So it's, some fund managers are also scared of, for example, downgrading. And then investors kind of reflect this in these geographies and say, okay, we're fine with an Article 8 as long as we know exactly what you're doing. And I mean, in parentheses, being an Article 9 is not necessarily better. It's more a question, does it reflect the investment strategy? So I think this is the main point. And then maybe to cover the geographies, then of course we have also the markets where private debt is still not as developed, so to say. So I think the, let's say, objective there would be in first place to actually create this alternative way of financing for companies, and then also for LPs to become aware of the strategy and take certain trust. I mean, it's also a question of risk and return, because if we move, let's say, more towards Eastern Europe, you have to take other risk and return perspectives into consideration. But also there, what we see, there's a move towards sustainability. Like, for example, to give an example, right now we're looking at a fund in one of the Baltic countries that looks to finance sustainable agriculture. So there is really, there is a move that we see. And I mean, at EIF side, at least, we try to be at the forefront and also raise investors' appetite by, I mean, one hand talking to GPs, but then also to investors directly if and where applicable.
Very interesting. And Vincent, on the fundraising side, do you see a demand for either Article 8 or 9, or they don't care?
No, they care, and I'm going to echo what Priscilla said. The issue is we have been using, when I say we, not TKO, but the whole market or GPs have been using the SFDR classification as a label, okay, at one point, like in the previous years, because it was an easy way to differentiate yourself and make it clear, you know, between your different strategies to your LPs. And in this very complicated world where everything is moving very fast, it was something very useful you could use to try to at least make clear what was your strategy. But it has never been a label. So I think now we have more and more clarifications about SFDR, like Article 8, 9, and 6. We understand that the choice we made before were made not the right choice, okay, because we didn't have enough information. And now we know that because the European Commission made it clear that it's a clarification, it's a transparency directive, okay, and it should not be used as a label. So we have a lot of LPs. They are confused now because they want to invest in impact. And we say, great, we have an impact fund, it's Article 8, and they say it's not possible, it cannot be Article 8 if it's an impact fund. If it's where really impactful, it will be Article 9 because this is the best standard. So we have to explain now, and it's a challenge to explain that Article 9, just like Priscilla did, is not better than 8, it's just different strategy. And also it's reflect your ability to collect data. Because at the end, if you want to classify yourself as an Article 9, your ability to collect data has to be very high, okay? If you can't report on what you did on some key metrics of your portfolio companies, you won't be able to comply with the Article 9 directive. So we'll have to reclassify yourself at 8, okay? So there is a lot of criteria to take into account, and it's not as simple as that. And we are paying back because now we have to do the move backwards, saying it's not a label, it's a transparency directive, and please keep in mind that it's not because it's 8 or 9 that one is better. Also, one point about Article 8 and the regulation is this famous sustainable investment definition. Okay, because this is also creates a lot of confusion now. Because to be 9, for those who are not aware, you need to have 100% of your investment that are actually classified as sustainable investment. To do that, you have 2 ways. The first one is easier to align to the European taxonomy, or you have to create your own methodology definition of sustainable investment and explain why this investment is sustainable. When you look at the European taxonomy, it's great, but today the eligibility is pretty low. When you invest in the real economy, most of the activities are not eligible. So since they are not eligible, they can't align to the taxonomy. So basically, you can't use the European taxonomy as a private debt lender in your Article 9 fund because your alignment will never reach 100%. The only way you can do that is if you are an infrastructure fund, okay, and you invest in green assets, and this is a way, to make sure that the way to classify your fund as 9. So it leaves you with the sustainable investment definition. And this is a big issue to me because you leave the opportunity to all the GPs to come up with their own definition. So it creates 2 strategies. Either you say, I'm going to be very strict on my sustainable definition, and most of your investment won't fit this definition, so that you won't be able to classify your fund at 9. And you feel that you are doing the right thing because obviously being sustainable is something very hard to achieve, especially in this transitional world. Or you're going to come up with a very loose definition of sustainable investment. So you will be able to classify your investment as sustainable and issue Article 9 funds. Okay. So there is strategic moves here. And this is what I don't like about the regulation in the SFDR. It's because it gives you this opportunity to interpret some stuff and the strategy are not aligned. Okay. So you may have Article 9 funds now with a very loose sustainable definition that are very not green or not sustainable, while Article 8 fund can be very sound from a methodology standpoint. And the role of the LPs is now, and this is my advice to you, and please do it because it will make my life easier, to look into the methodology and challenge the GPs to see what do you have actually behind your famous sustainable investment definition to make sure that it's actually sustainable.
Indeed, so we see that there's still a lot to do, a bit of work around this directive, which is indeed not perfect for the moment, and there are all those missing points or still those gray area which doesn't help in terms of comparativity of the fund for the moment, and I'm sure it will develop still in the future. Biliana, would you like to maybe share some best practices?
I can only agree with what Vincent very eloquently described. So what I would suggest is focus on the substance, on the work, and to the extent possible, ignore the labels. What we do is we work with our LPs, with our investors, to integrate as much as of their views and procedures and understandings into the products we design. We have quite a lot of single client funds, but also in pooled funds. We also take investors' feedback into consideration, and then, as I said, we've always focused on the doing. For example, we have investment products that are not in scope for SFDR, but we manage them with the same mindset, with the same procedure as an Article 8 or as SFDR product. And until the fog clears, I think that sticking to our philosophy and making sure that we have evidence and data on how we achieve how we meet our commitments is what is important here.
Thank you, Biliana.
If I may.
Please.
No, just I mean, thank you very much to both of you. I think I would agree to the point that it's very important to look actually what is underneath, and also the point on the sustainable investment definition. I mean, on one hand, it can be environmental or it can be social. I think on one hand, it can be good to leave some flexibility, but we need to be very sure that when it's an Article 9, it's actually a really ambitious, sustainable target. And this is really at the core of also what we look at when we look at funds. And for example, when we go for, let's say it's an Article 8 fund, we could have a very strong ESG score, ESG assessment, but which maybe doesn't take, or the fund is not willing at this point, or doesn't see the opportunity to actually go one step further and have an objective that covers all investments. So indeed, it's better probably to remain as an Article 8. One thing we see when we have, we touched upon the topic of impact funds. When we look at impact fund, indeed, theoretically, an impact fund can be an Article 8, even though I think the question does come up, if you have a clear impact theme, why wouldn't you want to be an Article 9? Making sure that your investment does no significant harm, making sure your impact theme aligns to the sustainable objective under the SFDR. So I think there are questions that you would need to ask just to complement.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, very relevant. We still have a couple of minutes. I wanted to touch base specifically on the E of the ESG and on climate change. And I have this an easy question for you, and maybe Priscilla, you can start answering it, about how do you make the difference really between what is really impactful for climate change and what is actually greenwashing? So where do you put the limit or the border between the two?
Good luck with that.
Indeed. I mean, I think let's start with it that it's still a topic that is under development. And I mean, as mentioned before, like the perfect reference framework is for sure the EU taxonomy, even though knowing that the application, especially at the lower mid-market level for SMEs and small mid-caps, is quite complicated. So I mentioned before the EIF climate action environmental sustainability criteria. This is intended to be an answer to this, to have a guide on what is considered as a sustainable investment, but still possible to achieve also for a smaller company. And of course, it will depend again on the fund strategy. But I think what is really important to look at what is the objective, or what does the fund promise, and what do they actually achieve afterwards. And on the on the green side, for example, there are really different levels let's say if we say a company is Paris aligned, then let's see, okay, what exactly do you mean? How much CO2 do you plan to reduce on a yearly basis? Not just go for the lower limit, but actually go for the upper limit. So there are really a number of factors that can and need to be looked at.
Indeed. Vincent, Biliana, do you want to add something?
All very valid points, and nothing to add to that. Really, it's very well currently said.
Vincent,
Well,
on greenwashing, and maybe also
Yeah.
on
Greenwashing,
the
yeah.
very
My favorite topic.
the very because you have at TKO a very important decarbonization strategy. So if you want to also to explain a bit what it can be.
Yeah. So what I would say is to differentiate a strategy with a sound methodology and a strategy with a greenwashing methodology is not something easy. Okay, you need to spend some time, because when you look at the pitch and the marketing document, they all look very nice and very ambitious. So my recommendation, and this is what we do when we structure ESG ratchets, is we try to base everything on standards. So when it comes to decarbonization, obviously it's the Paris Agreement, and we use the science-based target methodology. Okay, so we do not come up with our own numbers because we are not scientists or experts. We based our strategy, our KPI objective on scientist standards. The issue is today we are lacking a lot of standards. So basically, instead of a science-based target on biodiversity, you have basically nothing. A lot of people are working on that, but you don't have a global standard. On the social aspects, same. We don't have a global standards, so it requires to do a lot of research. Okay, so the European Commission, and I use a lot what they publish, because they publish a lot of different reports that are to me very relevant on different topics. Lately, we work on a group of pharmacists in Italy, and honestly, we based on our KPIs. We find our KPIs on the European Commission report on healthcare in Italy. There were all the issues that has to be addressed, and we were able to come up with something sound based on researches. So my tips, piece of advice will be to base everything on science and standards. And be very cautious. Do not over commit. Okay, and typically, and this is what I saw in Priscilla's presentation about avoided emission, for example. And there is a lot of debate about avoided emission. And typically at TKO, we decided to not publish anything, to not base a KPI on avoided emissions, just because they are strong estimations. Okay, so they are based on methodologies that are not sound enough from our point of view to base on our strategy of that. So that's why it's an example to show that we do not overcommit. We just try to be transparent on our methodology, be able just disclose what we'll be able to disclose. Okay, so even to calculate the carbon footprint today is quite a challenge. Okay, so we stay with the basics, try to calculate the carbon footprint based on standards, and the new stuff, the new is the innovation and everything. We'll go there when we will be ready, and when we think that we'll have sufficient data or be confident enough to go on this side. But we are very cautious, and this is hard because, as you may have noticed, there is a lot of innovation, and everyone tries to differentiate themselves and say I'm more impactful than my peers and everything. So just try to step back, do not overcommit, be transparent, base everything on standards, and I think you will be fine.
Not an easy task.
No, it's not.
To compare the strategy and the data and collect the data. Maybe Priscilla, on climate change and the ambition of the European Union for climate change, how does it interact today with also the ambition to be more independent in terms of energy?
Yes, I think it's a topic that has become more and more important in the past month. And there are definitely challenges attached. I mean, some voices may say the energy independence is quite difficult to combine with the move towards sustainable investments. Others would say that it's just the other way around, and that we need to focus more and more on sustainable investments. And I would tend to rather agree with the second one, also in line with what EIB, EIF is and EU as such is promoting, even though I think we need to take into account that it will take some more years. It's more of a medium run objective. And in this way, it is so important to have money available to actually invest in these new strategy in research and development, like, for example, where we still need a lot of research and also investors are ready to go into the space, for example, in the question of hydrogen, green hydrogen, or other technical developments that will allow us to actually reduce our energy use, have alternative energy solutions, and as such move towards, let's say, energy independence, while at the same time also reaching the target of being neutral by 2050. So I think it can go together.
Yes, big challenge, indeed. And we can see that when we talk about climate change, there are so many parties involved. So you have indeed the European Union, the government, the investors, the investment managers, all those, and of course also the target companies that we are trying to influence. There are quite a lot of parties involved, and that's not an easy topic. And it comes to my question maybe to Biljana on how to align, how to make sure that we are in a win-win situation, and that that all the interests of all those parties are aligned in this type of climate change strategy.
I would start with the top. I think that the corporate culture, the asset management and the fund management firm needs to support certain values and convictions. And as I said, we've been investing according to our moral convictions for quite a while, way before it became fashionable. For example, we've always excluded certain sectors like nursing homes, like care homes, from our investable universe, because we do not believe that they are suitable for private equity ownership. The business model just doesn't work with vulnerable people. That's just one example of exclusions we have always had. More recently, of course, we have more structured and more extensive approach, but having that culture embedded in everything the company does is very important. The second thing, of course, is incentives, and I can give an example of one incentive that I think aligns very well the interests of LPs and the GPs and the common good. We have implemented ESG linked carried interest, where we have KPIs. For example, the diversity of senior management, gender diversity. Then we have KPIs on how actively we engage with the investee companies, and actually how the ESG score of our overall portfolio develops over time. So that incentivizes us, of course, on corporate level to keep the company binded by the same principles we demand from our investee companies, but also incentivizes us to be more proactive and engage and move the needle, effect change at the investee company level as well. So this is just an example, and there are other tools I'm sure that can be used to a certain extent. But yeah, corporate culture and incentives in place. And again, transparency, we publish all this in our annual report, both the corporate development, corporate commitments, plan for the year forward, as well as achievement on the asset level side.
Thank you. leads us to the end of this session. So a word to conclude, maybe we will start with Priscilla.
You. Yeah, I think what is it is a challenging and a very passionate topic, the question of sustainability, ESG. And I think one message we can take is that everyone can be involved. Like if we look back a few months, years, the idea might have still been that especially on the private debt side, there's maybe not that much that can be done. And as we see how things are moving, there are always new and creative ways to actually move towards a change. And I think business as usual is just not an option anymore. We have seen a lot of research actually showing how we're actually the environment is changing. So we need to move, and I think it's the responsibility for all of us to take a step and find the right way.
Definitely. Viviana?
If I make a small wish, maybe we all agree standardization, availability of data, and I know that there are great initiatives at listed corporate big blue chip level, and hope they trickle down little by little to the SME sector, to the private markets, and we all have nice standards. And one big wish, maybe more cooperation between the private sector, the regulators, and the government on two reasons. To first of all, to make sure that everybody is doing what they say they are doing, not only fund managers but also the corporates. And the second one, I think this green transition, of course, is driven by the private sector, but we need the government to ensure that no one is left behind. There will be winners and losers. We need to make sure that this is kept in balance so that we keep the public engaged and on the right side of change.
That's true. We talk quite a lot about SMEs and how we push them towards ESG, but what about the large cap? Huh? Indeed. Vincent, do you want to conclude?
By wish, I will say some rain, because there's not rain for a month, and we are experiencing some stress on our phreatic table, so that's an issue. Now, jokes aside, I will say to conclude, just try. You will learn by doing. By the way, we are learning. Don't wait too long, because it's going very fast. And even for me, you know, I'm supposed to be an ESG expert, and to catch up what's going on the market, it's a full-time job. So if you wait for too long, you will be very lagging behind and maybe not be able to catch up. So my wish would be a tip. I'm very generous tonight, give a lot of tips. Just try and learn by doing. Don't wait that you have all the standard regulation that will perfectly fit what you are waiting for to start acting. Otherwise, it will be too late.
That's a very good tip, and I can only agree with you, Vincent. I will open the session for a question from the audience, and we have those very cute mic that can be sent to the public. Moira, can you catch it? So if there are questions, you can speak in this cute mic cube. Do you have questions for our panelists? I even have a second one.
Well, you can do it.
Maybe I have actually one tricky question, because as we said during the session, the ESG ratchet is a very powerful tool for the lenders to work towards ESG. And I have this tricky question maybe for you, Vincent, or someone else, which is, okay, there are strong link, strong financial incentive towards ESG KPI, But how much does it cost for you not to be compliant, for example, on social? If you want to incentivize your target to go on gender diversity, how much does it cost for you on your on the margin? So it's more an ethical question.
Yeah. So I would say it depends on the company and the market, because for an industrial company, the social aspect may not be the main, the most urgent transitional point we're going to work on. But on services company, this is definitely something we're going to work on. So the magnitude of the ESG, the margin adjustment, so the level of the margin adjustment going up and down for the bips will depend on the sector. But usually, just to give you maybe an overview of how it ranges, today the margin adjustment ranges from 5 bips to 25 bips, okay, at the highest. But I think that I'm pretty sure it's gonna increase because of the current context with the interest rate. So we may see 30 bips, 35 bips going forward, and I won't be surprised. And this is something I would like to do also, because a bigger step in terms of incentives. So I would say, to your tricky question, that it depends on the sector.
Tricky question, easy answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Kidding.
I would say, I would add to that the size of the ratchet is not yet material enough compared to the overall margin. So the loans are issued with the reference rate in the margin. So I would say about 10% of the overall margin, 5 to 10. So it's in overall, it's really it's important, but not really going to kill the company. Let's put it this way. I think what is important is to incentivize the management and to raise the awareness of key topics that they need to manage. So put topics, and you mentioned the social aspect, topics like labor, the safety of the labor force. So incidents or accidents happening, whatever the industry on the in the workforce, people injured or God forbid dying. We have, in addition, of course, to the labor to diversity of the workforce, we have training, how you train them. You have you can have relevant not only environmental but relevant topics that you can manage as well via that mechanism. And as I said, it's not going to take the company into bankruptcy if they break or deteriorate on a certain KPI, but it certainly puts the agenda in the management committee of what they should be following and what they should be working on. And of course, signaling strongly to the marketplace that this is a company which is committed to certain improvements in certain key areas, like the environment, but also labor force, community relations, and governance, good governance. I think that everybody takes governance as granted, but diversity of the board, independent directors, etc., is very, very important in this aspect as well.
Indeed. I mean, I would agree to that one without going too much into the ethical question, because I mean, I think it's probably very difficult, if not impossible, to measure in such a way. Maybe just to add, we see different ways to actually implement these margin ratchets. The idea behind, as you were saying, is always to incentivize the borrower to actually correspond to the targets that have been identified. It can be a margin up, it can be a margin down, can then also be taken into account the question of the financial return versus the impact objective or the sustainable objective, or it can even be a penalty. So I think there can be different economic ways, and we can be creative and open to new developments in this space.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question.
Go ahead.
Start. Maybe a question more for Vincent and Biljana regarding the investors and the sponsors of new funds. There are some sponsors that have interest in ESG, some others not. What's your experience? Why they have more and others not? What's the difference between them?
Maybe I can start because, as I mentioned, we only work with sponsors who have similar values and convictions to ours. These are long-term illiquid investments. This is not listed equity where you can buy now and sell 10 minutes later. We're committed to these companies for the longer term. And we very carefully select the sponsors we work with. This is a key. As much as we can influence things as lenders, it's important to have the equity owners, whether it's the sponsor or the owner of the company, the equity owners on the map, on the same page with us. This is a really precondition. We wouldn't work with sponsors that don't share our values, for many reasons, but this is one. And the second one is that any sponsor who is again going into private equity, it's not something that you commit to easily. These are long-term projects, and sponsors who do not understand the risks of investing in companies with environmental liabilities, litigation liabilities potentially related to labor disputes or environmental disasters. I think such sponsors do not take their risk management seriously, and again, this is just good risk management. So that's a very important incentive for the sponsors as well.
Yeah, I would add also the regulation, and that's a key driver of the allocation to impact fund or sustainable funds. Especially in the north of Europe. When you look at the north of Europe, I find them more sophisticated than the south of Europe. They are more aware of, the sustainability and the impact theme. So they are pretty up to speed. And this is the regulation that helps them. For example, in the Netherlands, the hedge fund have to allocate a portion of their asset under management to sustainable impact strategies. So that helps to attract these investors, and which is not the case in the south. And I feel that the maturity in the south is not as high as in the north. To me,
yeah, and I agree.
To me, the people that lead there over there.
Yeah, I answered from the point of view of the sponsors, from the point of view of our investors, the people who invest, give their money for us to manage. I totally agree. It's more developed, and it's been for years. I've long experience, my roots in the Nordics, so this is something that started actually way before the regulation, probably 15 years ago already, and it's a trend that is only intensifying with a lot of the big, very large pension funds committing to biodiversity targets, Paris climate targets. So it's a must there, and we're talking about multi-billion portfolios that are being readjusted or repositioned.
Let's be honest, it's still sustainable investment and impact investment is still a small portion of the whole market. It's growing very fast, but it's still a very small portion.
And something, because we work quite a lot with institutional investors, insurance companies, banks, pension funds as well. They have their own regulations and requirements, disclosure requirements. So they need to go through the same exercise that we're going on the investment side. So we work together with them, as I said, to develop tools and strategies that help them achieve their own goals and meet their own disclosure requirements.
And in the end, to some degree, it's probably more of also a chicken and egg principle. So if you're let's say a debt provider, then you choose with whom you actually work. There's a bit the feedback we also get indeed. If you decide to only work with sponsors that do take ESG into account, that will to some degree limit your universe. But this is then a question of what are you ready to risk for the strategy you want to implement.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of restrictions. I mean, we also have preference on which industrial sectors we lend to. So as I said, we prefer non-cyclical, more resilient sectors. So we always have to choose where to put your money, and that's part of the decision making. As I said, it's just one factor to take into consideration. But yes, very important as well.
Okay, it's very fast. I'm not sure. Butena, can you send it over there?
What are your, right now, like standardization of the data, gathering of the data. So I think technology plays part as well in this ESG. So how do you see technologies impacting in terms of, I don't know, like capturing all the data? Are you looking for what technology do you see right now in practice, like what you do? Because I think one of the challenges is like how you filter, or like how would you capture all the data in a more efficient manner. Several line factors are coming in, and how do you also like what's your view on the technology right now? Where do you see your funds, or where do you see the market right now in terms of the technology? How do you also balance, because you want to have efficient technology, but of course you would want to invest into the technology. How would you balance it as well with the expectations from the investors, managing the cost of gathering and efficient data, and how would you balance the cost over the returns, and in terms of like having a long-term investment on this technology?
I can go if you want. Thank you. Very good question about the data collection. I don't have a clear view yet about how we're gonna collect this data, especially on private markets. What we do today, this is what has been described already, is we do an ESG questionnaire campaign once a year. Okay, so we try to collect the data at our portfolio company levels by sending a questionnaire through a digital platform, which is called Reporting 21, and I'm not sure you know it because it's very French oriented. So this is what we do. But what is interesting is what we plan to do in a couple of years. So again, the regulation will help us, because you may be aware that the EFRAG is gonna disclose a kind of standard report for all the portfolio companies that meet a couple of criteria. Basically, all the companies that have more than 250 employees will have to disclose some data using this framework. And this is very important to me. This is a key event, because it means that we have all this standardized data. We'll be able to use artificial intelligence to pick all the data we want, okay? And we will put that into our own system to be able to manage and base our decision on better quality data, okay? The thing is, it's not for tomorrow. So I think it will be in force in maybe 2 years or so. We know that the first reporting will not be the best, so we may have to deal with the old world. So we're sending a questionnaire. But this is how I see that. I see that we're gonna use more and more technology, because, and thanks to the regulation and the standardization that have been going on for a couple of years. The issue on that is if you only operate in Europe, that's fine, because you're gonna have the EFRAG, which will be the European standard. But if you operate also in the US, for example, you're gonna have another standard, which is ISSB, and they announced a couple of days that they will be ready to test next year. So it's pretty soon, quicker than I expected, by the way. And the thing is, they don't have the same standard. So even if they try to harmonize some metrics and the way that the companies are gonna report, they didn't find an agreement, especially on a very key problematic, which is the double materiality. So in the US, I don't know if you know that, but in the US, basically they based all their reporting and strategy ESG on a single materiality. So they just look at the impact of climate change on their portfolio companies. So it's just a really risk-based approach. When in Europe, we have been lobbying for a long time about the double materiality, which is the impact of climate change on the portfolio companies, what kind of risk that can imply, but the impact of the portfolio companies on the companies on climate change, which is to me key. See, if you don't look at that, you miss a big portion of the equation. So that will also create confusion, because they were not able to agree on the standard, and they have two different approaches. So as a global GP, you will have some companies that will report on double materialities and others on single materialities. So it won't be perfect again, and hopefully one day we will reach perfection, but I'm not sure. But yeah, so it's gonna improve. We're gonna face challenges. Technology will help us for sure, and again, thanks to the regulation.
Coming back to your question, it seems it covers like three different aspects. Basically, the question of cost and return, then the question of availability of data and comparability of data, where you provided very important examples, and then also how to actually benchmark this data. How do I decide that what I see in my portfolio should be comparable to a certain standard for this industry, for this geography, etc. For example, what we see is on when we're active in the lower mid-market SME, SMC space, and maybe you can, I don't know, confirm or contradict, but is that data has been much less available. And right now it only starts that with this movement, actually companies start to report on these data, which is already an important step as such, and which will then at some point also allow us to reap the positive returns, because right now, indeed, it's an additional cost factor. But then with, and as you mentioned before, with the technology available, at some point we will reap the returns of this.
It's a very, very good structured answer on the cost part. So concretely on our side, cost part, we see this part of as part of our service to our investors. So it is something we've been doing for a while, and it's part of what we do. It's integrated in the investment process, so it's integrated in our cost pricing, product pricing. The service providers, external service providers, we use one for collecting the data or the answers to our questionnaires and aggregating and analyzing that. I think that there is a lot of fragmentation currently. There is a lot of startups, a lot of small companies who are on the private side. On the public side, I think we're seeing consolidation, and some key players have emerged already, and I think that they'll stay in business for quite a while. But on the private side, I think we're still working through the, there is a bit of a natural selection, and I think eventually there'll be some winners and leaders coming up in the space. But we are experiencing many different providers, some better than others, and looking still for the perfect solution. I don't think there'll be one for a while. And the last one, the standardization, that was my wish. I wish we can trickle down from the blue chip listed companies down to SMEs. So for companies in the same industry, of course, size might bring make some topics irrelevant, but I think that will help us with standardization of metrics and then benchmarking as well.
All right. Question again.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead, over there. You have the mic already.
Yes, so I have a question. So just for the background, I work as portfolio manager in a third-party Manco, and I'm currently working on a transaction for a fund, for a private debt fund that is SFDR Article 9, that wants to do a sustainable investment with social objective. I was a little bit puzzled by this fund. Basically, they send a questionnaire to the investee company with questions such as, do you have any children working in your company? Do you have any employees that don't receive a salary? And these investee companies answer, no, everything good, everything fine. And then the fund receives that questionnaire back, and they fine with the answers provided by the investee company. So I am wondering how you do with the data provided by the investee companies, how you ensure that the data is reliable, and how you make sure that the data outcomes are not manipulated in a way or another. So for social, for social, with the social indicators, but also environmental indicators, how, for example, greenhouse gas emissions are not, for example, manipulated as well in a way or another by these investee companies? Do you have someone that goes into these investee companies and does the measurement? How do you ensure that the data is indeed reliable?
Could take this one. I mean, I think it's a very important point that you mentioned. I think 2 points come to mind. The one is on the social objective, and it links a bit to what we were discussing beforehand. Indeed, when you go to the SFDR, it leaves the option of a social sustainable investment objective. But I think it really needs to be analyzed very closely to make sure it is an ambitious one. And by the way, I mean, there are developments that might go into the direction that you actually need a minimum environmental in order to be an Article 9, but that kept apart. So I think that is one very important point to look at. And what you were looking at the data, for example, when we analyze a fund, we always want to make sure that there is an independent review of the data that is used. I mean, on one hand, it's for sure the fund manager that needs to do a review as they do for any financial data that they receive, but then also to be able to have a third party review that looks at the data provided, maybe not each piece of data on a sample basis, but to ensure consistency and reliability.
At the portfolio company level, I can tell you quickly what we do, and it's a challenge. So obviously it's not perfect. Let's be honest. Just because the maturity of the portfolio company is not there. You know, they are learning and they are progressing on their reporting of data and even monitoring the data. So we have this digital platform I was talking about, Reporting 21. They fill out the questionnaire, and we have someone internally that actually look at the answers and try to make sure it's correct, and they can, you know, engage and double check that with the company. But again, it doesn't mean that the data we're gonna get will be perfect. Okay, there is no way to make sure that it's perfect today. We'll just make sure that it's consistent and makes sense. Okay. Again, this is back to the point I was making before. As long as we don't have a standardized reporting, we have no way to make sure that the data that is provided through ESG questionnaire is right. On carbon, it's a bit different since you rely on consultant. So basically, the carbon footprint calculation is not done by the companies, and if it's done by the company, will request a third-party audit. Otherwise, it has no value. And on carbon, they follow the GHG protocol. So at least you have a standard you can follow, and you can make sure that the calculation will be consistent through your portfolio. But on other metrics, as long as we don't have this report, sustainability report, audited by third party, just like we have for financial statements, the only way you can make sure that your data is correct is to have someone to look at it.
No, I'm happy you mentioned financial statements, because in addition to benchmarking, so when you have a portfolio of number of companies and you benchmark these companies against peer group, you see outliers. First of all, if you have companies and you don't benchmark on an aggregate, you benchmark on the individual KPIs, be it environmental or social KPIs. And if you see that companies of the same size in the same industry, in the same roughly geography, have outliers, and there is no other explanation for that difference, then you really one needs to go dig deeper. So benchmarking is one versus the relative peer group, and then the second one is, of course, comparing with the financial statements. If you have a company where the answers on the ESG questionnaire don't quite match with what they report in their financial statements, on various topics, I think that that's just good. Somebody needs to do their homework and do proper due diligence. That's the only way to go. In addition, of course, in the luxury to have the third-party verification on certain things and company visits, but with a company you can never visit all the locations where they operate, even if it's a European company.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I want to come back on the ESG ratchet for a moment. I'm not sure whether I missed a chapter in your presentation, but I'm not clear about the incentive, where the incentives are coming from. If I'm not mistaken, it's not coming from the regulation. If it's not, well then, is it coming from potentially having on board some public investors like the EIF? Or is it really coming generally from the investors themselves? Which, I mean, apart from maybe the Nordics, I don't see that coming by, coming directly from the investors. I see the point in having the company improving on their ESG score, so to say, but this will be at the expense every time the company is doing some improvement, it will be at the cost of the investor, right? So I'm just really struggling with the incentive part here.
I would maybe frame it a different way, because these improvements, as you say, they're improvements, and often they're improvements in efficiency, which directly goes to margins improvements. There are improvements in, let's say, their avoidance of risk. So it is, I would disagree that there is not really incentive to make these improvements. Of course, you can see on aggregate, they will be seen as a positive on the bottom line by investors as well, and the companies themselves, because these companies at some point will it's the private equity model. The private equity owner or the owner of the company will look for an exit, and that raises the value of the company, the terminal value of the investment. So I think that there are incentives on all sides, because these lead to efficiencies, reduced risks, and better risk-adjusted returns for everybody, better terminal values and higher exit values for the owners.
I would say, I agree with what you said, and I would say that it's risk management purely, okay? From a GP standpoint, if I understood your question correctly, your question was related, what is the GP incentive to do that, right? So from a GP standpoint, it's risk purely. Today, we have no models that help us to calculate the extra financial risk of a deal. While today we have all the GPs, probably, I don't know how many GPs we have in this room, but all the GPs, they have models that calculate the financial risk of an investment, and they're able to materialize that in their interest rate. So the cost of the debt, the cost of your margin, basically. But no one today is able to materialize that into a model, the extra financial risk, I mean. So the only way we can do that, and this is the point I was trying to make earlier, is to use ESG ratchets and to adjust, the margin based on the company achievement on this transition. Because when you look at it, we are into a transitional world, okay? So we have to make sure that the company will improve over time and will be able to face the transition and have a business model strong enough to face the transition. The thing is, if, as opposed to the financial analysis, if you look at the ESG risk at the moment you invest, okay, you basically have a backward-looking analysis because you have the ESG performance of the company over the last years. And as opposed to the financial component, the ESG performance should be a forward-looking analysis, meaning that this is the ability of the company to tackle its changes and improve its business model going forward. To be honest, I don't care what the company did over the last 5 years on the ESG side, because most of them, they didn't do much, okay? This is the reality of the market. We are all improving and progressing because of the regulation. And this topic is more and more dominant within the organization now. So what I'm interested in is to look at the forward-looking analysis. That's why, to me, the only way to integrate that within my cost of risk is to put an ESG ratchet. Tomorrow, probably the ESG ratchet will disappear when we'll be sophisticated enough, and we won't have this debate about, oh, this is at the cost of the investors, because actually you decrease the margin, because that will be already integrated in the first place, right away within the cost of our debt or the margin, which is the case for financial components. So I understand your point. It is at the expense of the investors, because basically we invest this money and we decrease the margin, so the return is lower than you should have expected. The way we should see it is, it has not been integrated right away into the margin. That is actually the true risk evaluation of the company, because we were not able to do it because we have no model today. So the only way we can integrate that is into the margin up and down. Tomorrow, my bet is that will disappear, and that will be integrated right away within the cost of the structuration, and we won't have this debate about this is at the cost of or on the back of when it's ratchet up. But I don't know if it's
so you're really implementing those ratchet in order to distinguish also yourself from your competitor, I suppose, like what Biljana has mentioned. So could we say that?
I wouldn't say it's I mean, obviously it helps. It's a good signal, as I said, both for the companies who are lending with these terms, but also for us. What I would say, in addition, and maybe expanding what Vincent is saying about the backward looking at the end, and then expanding out of the sustainability or ESG ratchet loans to the overall private credit space. First of all, I think it's very important to see what the company has done before, because you might end up with the liabilities that you are not aware of, and these potential liabilities definitely should be priced into the cost of debt. But the second thing is that let's not think that ESG considerations and ESG due diligence is only embedded in loans that have ESG ratchets, because these are, as we all agree, these are part of the risk assessment, pre-investment, part of the due diligence process, and whether the loan is structured with a ratchet or not, for us at least, this is an integral part of the decision-making process and where we price our capital, our loans. So this is whether it is a ratchet or not. For us, it's embedded in the cost of debt, or the cost at which we offer our funding. And some special cases we're able to implement ratchets for the and I agree it's a forward-looking measure, but we should also forget we need to know potential liabilities, historical inherited liabilities, either on the social or environmental side, that need to be embedded in that decision whether ratcheted or not.
Yeah, so the main goal is not to differentiate yourself from your peers. It's not that, because obviously everyone is gonna catch up, and you will have no way to differentiate yourself. This is the good takeaways you can have. It's always good to bring your expertise. It creates a better relationship with your companies, so you will lever on that going forward. But the main goal again is to make sure that this company will have a sound financial profile, okay, and it will improve their ability to pay back our debt. And this is, I guess, what we want as a debt provider.
De-risking.
Exactly.
A minor point to add from an LP perspective. I mean, we have these strategies where you have mainly margin reductions, but you can also have an increase or a penalty payment.
Yes.
And then, from a return perspective. Yeah,
we usually have up and down, so it's not always down. So it can be up as well.
Up and down to me should be mandatory.
Up and down, yes, absolutely.
It should not only be on the reduced side, because it doesn't make any sense. Again, if you want to project your financial risk, it has to be up and down. It cannot only be down. Even if the market has not been mature enough. And to be honest, it was not easy to always negotiate the ratchet up. It's more and more common, and that's why also we disclose this guide where we clearly state that it has to be up and down, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. But we did that because we want, everyone to understand that it's not something we do because we are philanthropists. We are investors, we take risk, and this should be part of our risk.
So I've been informed that the drinks are ready, so we can continue the conversation outside. So I will thanks all the panelists. Thanks a lot for your participation and
Thank you.
Thank you.